Oh, hello everybody. Happy Friday. It's not a very nice day today, is it? It's really grey, so I guess that's perfect for doing a workshop about monochrome. I guess it makes staying indoors even worse, the fact that it's so miserable outside. But hopefully you're all staying safe and you're as happy as you can be. Everybody, I need to turn happy Friday. I hope you're safe and feeling as happy as you can be. And I hope you're enjoying this series. So welcome if it's your first time. Welcome back if it's not your first time. Please, please, please tell as many people as you can about this, because the more people that join in, I think the more fun we can have, because I've got some ideas for doing stuff, more collaborative stuff. And I guess we're going to be here for another 3 weeks. So I'm really going to have to stretch all my resources and dig really deep to try and fill that time productively. But I hope it's starting to make you a little bit more creative, and hopefully it's giving you a bit of inspiration about when you try your next drawing or painting or bit of creative work. So it's mainly drawing and painting focused, but we're going to also touch on some other things. And also it's really dependent on you telling me what you need to know, what you want demystifying and what you'd like me to explain or try and do a workshop around. And today, 2 recommendations have been the inspiration for today's class. So I'll explain a little bit more later on. What else do I need? I'm a bit disorganized today, actually, because I've been doing quite a lot of preparation. And normally I have stuff written down very carefully, just so that my not script, but I have a kind of order of things that I want to talk about. So apologies if today's a little bit more of a jumble, because I haven't been quite as organized as I thought I would be. Let me just see who's watching there. Oh, it's sunny somewhere. It's raining outside my door, just here. Yeah, hello everybody. I hope you've settled down already, and we can start. So today is about monochrome, and I've called it color, even though today is really just about 2 colors, black and white. But I thought what I would do would be to talk about why we talk about monochrome, first of all, talk a little bit about some media, so that by that I mean pens, pencils, erasers, that kind of thing, and then dig a little bit deeper into this topic as we go through. So I think the first thing I want to clear up is I want to talk about some expressions that we use when we talk about drawing and painting, and other stuff as well. And probably the first one is tone. So I'm sure if you've been to an art class, or you can remember being at school, or even if you're at school, and you get taught about tone. Tone is, or tonal variation is, light and dark. And tone is important because often if we're drawing, which is the first thing that we start doing, tone allows us to represent the 3-dimensional world around us on a piece of paper. And tone allows us to create shadows and shading, and gives us a range from very bright things. So in this scene here, you can probably figure out the brightest thing is probably my t-shirt, or maybe it's that bit of light coming in there. And then the darkest thing is probably my oven or my hair or my moustache. So that's the range of tone in the scene that you're looking at. And it's very important that you think about that when you are starting to draw, that you've got at your disposal this whole tonal range. So shade and tint is something different. Shade is when a color goes towards black, and tint is when a color goes towards white. So I think in normal conversation, you mix those 2 things up a little bit. So shades and tint. Tint goes towards white, shade goes towards black. And then hue is H-U-E. That is a term that we talk about when we're talking about color. So colors being a certain hue. So these are technical words, but they also get thrown around a little bit in conversation. And I think a lot of time people mix them up. So it's just good to have a little bit of a recap about those terms and exactly what they mean. So if you're drawing today, we're going to be focusing on tone. So tone is going to allow us to show the three-dimensional world through our painting or drawing. It's mainly going to be drawing focused, and I've got a mixture of analog and digital for you as we continue today. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you this picture. So I took a photo just a minute ago of my fruit bowl, and I think I wanted to show you this because hopefully you can see that okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of color there. And I think if we're just using a pencil to represent that, things can be quite confusing because you've got to separate all that color from light and dark. So there's orange and green and red and white and black and yellow and brown in there. But I want to show you something here. So if we look at the saturation, so saturation is how much color value there is. And I start to remove the color saturation, you'll see how much that image changes. So things which you thought were maybe lighter or darker in tone actually have the similar tonal value. So I think in this, if we pay special attention to those tomatoes, because when we lighten those up, I don't think in that scene they look particularly dark, but when all the color is removed, apart from in that top right corner, they're really the strongest things there. And equally, I think that lemon, if you look at the lemon here and the white plate there, they actually have quite similar tonal value when I desaturate. But my brain is telling me that the white plate is much lighter than the lemons. So I think your brain, when you see stuff in color and then you're asked to do a drawing of it, it's really, really difficult because you've got to really, really understand what you're looking at and try and translate and get rid of all those colors so that when you're doing a drawing or a painting, you're just focusing on trying to get really good tonal values when you're trying to represent whatever it is. So that was the first thing. Okay, so if we move on, what I was talking about here is about different types of tone. And here are just 3 examples. So the top one there is pen, and sorry, the top 2 are pen, and then the bottom one is a pencil. And somebody was asking if I could talk a little bit about shading and cross-hatching. So I put this together to try and explain that a little bit. So the top one is a pen. So it could be something, I'll explain that in a minute, it's going to be too small. And really the tonal change comes about through the spacing. So all those lines are the same height, but as I space them out, space the lines out, so the tonal value changes. So it's dark on the left and light on the right. In the second one, what I'm doing here, I'm changing the line direction. So sometimes the angle changes. So on the left-hand side, the lines are vertical, and then they're also at 45 degrees left and right. And what that does, that makes a darker tone. So cross-hatching, you can also pay attention to the angle when you're just using line. And then on the right-hand side, we've got 3 things happening. We've got the spacing changes, the angle changes, but also the combination of those 2 things means that the density of line changes. And you can see on the right-hand side in the middle, it's gone a lot darker. And then when we come to the bottom example, this is a pencil. And really, the main thing that changes here is pressure. So the more pressure that you put on the pencil, the darker it's going to be. And also your lines, if you space them out, you can also make it lighter that way. So a combination of pressure and also spacing will change the tonal variation of whatever pencil that you're using. So I think that's something to think about and maybe just test a little bit when you're trying out your media. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I've got some things here to show you. So this is can you see that? That's a graphite pencil. So like with a normal pencil, it's a regular pencil is wood, and then in the center of it, you have graphite. And what this is just like that center part of a pencil, but much fatter. So it has a plastic protection around it so that your hands don't get really grubby when you're working, but you use it just like a pencil, and it means you don't have to sharpen it so much, and also it comes in a range of softness. That's what I was looking for. So this one is 8B, so that's very soft. And when you get, so H is hard, B is soft. And when you get a pencil like this, which is very, very soft, you can get a very dark line very, very quickly. So I really, really love drawing with these. You can really push the graphite around, and you don't have to sharpen it as much as you would a pencil, but you still can sharpen it to get a really fine point on it. Then the other thing I want to talk about is this, which is charcoal. So I had a look to see, there's two types of charcoal. There's regular charcoal like this, and then there's compressed charcoal. So this is regular charcoal, and it's made of a wood called willow. And the willow twigs are burned, and you end up with this very, very light, but very messy medium here, which is also very brittle. So it breaks really easily. And why this is good is you just need a very, very small amount of pressure to make a mark. And the other thing that's really good, you can erase it really quickly. You can rub it out, you can start again, you can move it around the page, and it becomes very flexible, very kind of loose. It's not a very precise way. And then I suppose something a little bit more precise would be drawing with something like one of these. A lot of architects use these. It's kind of halfway between a Bic biro and a fountain pen. So it has ink that comes out, and a roller ball on the end, but it's a little bit more fluid, I suppose, than a biro. So those are the main things we're going to be looking at today. Also, I have a white pencil here, a white colored pencil, which you might think is a bit useless if you're drawing on a white sheet of paper. It is, but we're going to be drawing on a darker tone piece of paper, and I'll show you that in a second. And then lastly, I want to talk about the rubber here, the eraser. And I really like this brand. It's a plastic eraser, and it's fairly tough, but it rubs out really well. But the thing that I always like to do with these, I like to cut them. So if you can see at the moment, if I can get that in light, it's fairly rounded at the end. But I've got a knife here, a chopping board, and what I've done here, I've cut it. And what this allows me to do, it allows me with this little bit to have a very sharp edge, so I can be really precise when I'm erasing. And that's something that, in case I forget to mention later on, I think when you're at school, a lot of the time erasing is about rubbing out mistakes. But when we start to draw in interesting ways, you can actually draw with an eraser. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on, if I remember. So let's get started. I've prepared some examples for you. So the thing that I think is a really, really good example of to draw is this. And I'll explain why in a second. I'll just share the page with you. So a white cup, I think, is really, really good because it does several things. You have an internal space, you have an external space, and then you have negative space. So negative space is the space around an object. So it could be the space, the negative space is the shape around me, or if I'm scratching my head, it might be this shape, this triangle between my head, my elbow, and my shoulder. But there's some negative space here. We have an internal volume, an internal part, and we have an external part. And I think that makes it a really interesting object to draw. I know it's kind of boring, but it's a really, really good object because it has those three different types of qualities, which are going to really, really help you get much better at trying to create this form. So the first thing that I did was, there's the colored version, and there is the black and white version, just as a reference point for you to look at, so you know what we're talking about as we go further on. So the first one I want to show you is this one. And each of these, I suppose they took about 12 minutes each. And the way I started off with this is by covering the pale sheet of paper. It wasn't quite white, it was off-white. First of all in charcoal, and then removing it with an eraser. So all of that whole process was about removing rather than adding. So if I just show you quickly, you'll see how the time lapse of that went. So starting dark, blocking out, removing some shade, some light and dark, some tone to get that three-dimensional form. I'll show you that once again because it's went by pretty quickly. So starting off by covering the sheet, marking out a few construction lines, and then removing. And I did that digitally, but you can also do that by covering a sheet of paper with charcoal and then getting a really good eraser, a sharp eraser, and really starting to carve into that, that covered dark sheet, which you've just covered with charcoal, to remove some of the charcoal so that you can work from dark to light, because normally when we draw we start with a white sheet of paper, so we start with light and we draw with a dark pencil on top. So this is almost the reverse of that, but I'm not trying to reverse the tonal value, I'm just trying to look at it slightly differently. So instead of looking for the positive for the dark parts, I'm looking for the light parts first of all. And it was a really interesting way to draw. I don't normally draw like that, but it's something that if you do it, your brain will have to adapt for, because it's about looking and searching for what you need to remove in order to make it an interesting drawing. Right, now this was really strange. I started off with this one, trying to do a crosshatch, and because somebody asked me about crosshatching. And to be honest, it just started driving me mad. I think I got a bit crazy when I was doing this. And so you'll see from the time lapse, I started off really controlled, and then I just kind of started attacking it and started going a bit crazy with the cross-hatching. So this is what it looks like, and you'll see. So it starts off all nice and controlled. We're doing some very neat marks. And I got to this point, and then you can see I just started getting really frustrated and working in a much more dense way to try and get that three-dimensional form. And when I got to about that point, I thought, okay, I need to start removing some again. So I always think that digital is quite interesting because there are certain things which replicate analog painting and drawing. But what's happening here is that I'm drawing with a pen and getting to a certain point, and then I'm using the eraser to remove some pen. And you probably wouldn't be able to do that with a conventional traditional drawing. So that's kind of an interesting discovery. I'll just show you that once more. So yeah, I really started out trying to think about cross-hatching, trying to think about the vertical plane of the wood in the background and the horizontal plane, the tabletop, and trying to make my marks follow those form and also follow the form when it came to drawing the cup. And you can see that drawing kind of starts off quite tight, then it gets really loose and messy, and then I try and control it again by introducing some more white to try and make it a little bit more accurate. Okay, so that was the next one that I did. And then I did this one. So this one was really strange. So I don't think it's that successful, but the rule here was just drawing horizontal and vertical lines. So especially when you have something like an ellipse, it's really tempting to start drawing curved lines. And here I was just looking at vertical and horizontal lines. It was quite difficult to do this, to be honest. It's not a great result, but I think it's kind of interesting. Some interesting things here. I think I was able to have lines which are slightly closer together in this part here and then wider here. And I think that gives a quite good sense of depth. But this was really challenging doing this part here to try and show those internal and external shaded parts and the shadow there. So I won't do a time lapse of that. You can just have a look at that as it is. And then I did this one, which was not removing anything, just using black and on a white background. And trying to explore the full color range of a colored pencil by pressing really hard. So what I like about working like this is that you can get quite a lot of energy into the mark making on the sheet, but it's not very accurate. So when I was using those small scratchy marks, I could be much more accurate. And here you can see I've kind of gone over the line a lot when I've been trying to block in some color. But I kind of quite like these marks around here. They look like you're drawing with purpose and intention. And whilst I am on that subject, I want to talk about something which is a bit of my pet hate. And I think we're all guilty of it. So this was one that I started, which I then didn't like very much. And I think when you're doing some cross-hatching like that, I was trying to be really deliberate, but it was also a bit boring. And then I think what happens sometimes, people kind of, you get to a point and you don't really know what you're doing, and you might kind of just do something like that, or this kind of like flourish in the background. And I find those kind of marks really, really distracting. And I think they're a kind of mark of desperation. So when you're doing something, just try and make everything that you do deliberate, rather than doing these kind of flourishy, arty, rubbish gestures, because they don't really mean anything. And I think that always, for me, signifies you don't really know what you're doing. And it's a kind of last resort. So that's a little bit of a tip to try and avoid those kind of gestures. So try and everything that you do, make it deliberate. Right, let's continue. So this is an analog drawing that I did where I started off with a medium gray piece of paper, and I was using my white pencil, and I worked in a similar way to removing the charcoal, but this was also a little bit different actually. I was exploring the whole range of the pencil from light to dark. And I was also adding the graphite. And part of the reason that I like doing these demonstrations on the tablet is that when I come to photograph the analog work, especially if it's pencil, you get a really, really confusing sheen. So actually, in reality, the dark parts on the left of this, the shadow and the left part of the outside of the cup, they're actually a lot darker, but it just doesn't photograph well. So that's why I do a lot of stuff digitally. And yeah, this pencil was kind of interesting to use. It's quite waxy. I could get quite accurate lines here, but then also I could get some quite solid white blocking in there. And I think that's kind of okay. It looks quite three-dimensional. I kind of understand that it's got some volume to it. Yeah, I was happier with that one than I was with some others. Oh my gosh, then this one was so weird. What I did here, and this is going to be one of the challenges for you, is this is a continuous line. So what I did here was, this is a biro drawing where I wasn't allowed to take my pen off the page, and I was just going to do one continuous line, scratch, 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 scratch. And this was so difficult. I found this really, really was out of my comfort zone, and I found this very, very difficult to do. The challenge here was to keep the pen, which in this case was a biro, moving all the time. And it was really quick, and it was really unsettling, I suppose, to do this drawing and to try. And so I'd done, you know, those other 3 or 4 or 5 before that, but it was still really, really difficult to try and make a convincing volume. So yeah, that's one of the challenges. Have a go with a continuous biro line to see if you can draw a cup, because it's a lot harder than you think. I thought that was really, really difficult. And then this is probably my go-to method when I draw a portrait, or I'm drawing something like a still life, which is the graphite stick and an eraser. And I suppose there are 3 parts to this. There's roughly putting in some tonal values for the tabletop and for the wall, and then there's some shade that I also is part of that tonal range, which I quickly put in, and then I start to remove a lot of it with the eraser. And I suppose, just as a way of working, as you've heard me talk about in previous tutorials, this is really good because it helps you cover the whole page quite loosely, and then you can get a little bit more accurate with removing stuff with an eraser. And then the third part is just going back onto that and drawing over the top. So roughly putting in some marks, taking away a lot of those marks, and then adding marks back. So I guess this is a kind of combination of all of those. And then there's another thing here that I did, which was on the pavement this morning. So when I went for my walk, I got some chalk and I made a mug on the pavement. And actually, I think this is my favorite one. It didn't take very long, and I really enjoyed doing it. But I was, I live in an area where there's quite a lot of chalk in the soil. So I was thinking about what people might have to hand. I know that not everybody lives in an area where there's chalk, but most people, I guess, have pavements outside their house. So if you can do something like this whilst you're on your walk and you're not near anybody, then that would be really good. And yeah, this was starting on a dark background again, I would say. So a lot of it was just about trying to think about pulling out that three-dimensional form of the white cup on a dark background. So yep, that's another challenge for you. So so I see a lot of kids doing lovely drawings and messages around where I live on the pavement. So I've added to that by drawing my cup on the pavement. And then what else? Yeah, I just wanted to show you that one. So in the plan for planning this, I did a little drawing of a cup, and monochrome can be black and white, but it can also just be any color and white, right? Or any color and black. So this is a monochrome drawing, even though it's pink and white. And I kind of quite like that. It's got a range of mark and line and stuff. And it was just a little diagram to myself to help me. I think that says space at the top. So it's about that negative space between the handle and the cup. Right, and then I'm going to finish with this. So I had a nice message today from Jenny and Tom, and who are from Marine School, and they asked me, they'd been set some homework, and their homework was to explore line and texture. So hello to you, I hope you're watching. Let me have a look in the comments and see if you're there. Are you there? I don't know. Maybe you're watching, but you haven't logged in. Anyway, I hope you can see this. So I was thinking about your task. So your task was about line and texture, and drawing something that's at home and then adding some texture. And when I was looking around, I was thinking, actually, that's quite difficult. Most things, and especially the cup that I've been talking about today, doesn't have any texture. So this cup is just, it's one texture, which is kind of glossy, hard and shiny. But what I was thinking about, something that has got good line and good texture, is this. So hopefully you can guess what this is. So one line for the outside, and a softer line inside. Hopefully you can see by now it's some bread or some toast. And then you can make some smaller marks in here to represent the air bubbles in the dough or in the toast. And there you have a piece of toast with some line and some texture. But I didn't stop there. What I then thought about was this. So we've been drawing a cup today. So thinking about texture, that's what I thought about. So this is a teacup by Merritt Oppenheim, and it, I'm sure, gives most of you shivers. But this was a very famous piece of artwork when it was made, because what this does, when you look at it, you imagine drinking a cup of tea or a cup of coffee from that, and what that would be like. And so this is kind of like a threat, right? You don't actually drink from this, but the idea that you might kind of makes you feel really uneasy. So that was the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about your project. So I thought there's two ways of approaching your task. One way is to find an object which has texture in it, but another way to approach your task at marine school would be something like this. So you could start with something that doesn't have any texture, like a cup. And then you could imagine what that cup might be like if it was furry. So maybe you can use some line and some of the techniques that I've shown you today to start thinking about what a furry mug might be like. So there's two ways of doing that. So the first thing is to find something very heavily textured. It might be a woolly jumper, it might be a loaf of bread, or it might be finding something which doesn't have any texture on it and making it like it does have some texture. So it might be bringing a loaf of bread to something like a glass or a teacup, or it might be trying to think really extreme, like the teacup from Merritt Oppenheim, and trying to make it furry. So think about the things I've talked to you today about. You can use the line to still do the shading, but you can still think about making those lines a little bit rougher so they could maybe look like it was made of fur. So have fun with that. So there are your three challenges. One is the non-stop biro drawing of your object. Another one is the chalk on the pavement, dark paving slab, light object. And the third one is using texture and line and maybe importing a texture onto an object which doesn't have that texture. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed today's session. I'm almost out of time. The next tutorial is going to be aimed at a younger audience also, but the whole tutorial, because it's the weekend, will be aimed at a younger audience. So I will see you on Sunday. And as usual, please subscribe, please tell your friends, message me your examples of things that you've been trying at home. I love to see them, and also anything else that you would like to know about. Okay, I'll see you next time.